Okay, in the last video we talked about the idea of relative scarcity and having limited resources but unlimited wants and needs. And because we have limited resources compared to our unlimited wants and needs, we're forced to make choices. So whenever we allocate our resources, we need to make choices about whether we're going to allocate into one area or another. And that choice comes with it an opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative use of resources that is foregone whenever we make a decision. So whatever the next best thing we could have used our resources for is the opportunity cost. So when we weigh things up and we choose, we weigh up the relative merits of each of different things. So for example, if I had an hour when I got home from work, I might want to go to sleep. I might go watch TV, go for a run, hang out with friends. I have all those different options. I choose one. So say I chose to go to have a snooze. My next best alternative. So if my next best alternative was watching TV, that's my opportunity cost. So it's not all the things we give up, it's just the next best. Okay. So if I've got $10 and I want to spend some money on lunch, and I choose to buy a sandwich, whatever my next best option is my opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is not just measured as a dollar figure. Okay, so it's not just the money you give up to do something, but it can be measured in terms of time, and energy and things like that. So, for example, if we spend 2,000 to go to Queensland in the holidays, when we're allowed to go to Queensland again, the next best alternative would be not only the $2,000 that you give up, but what you would have done with that, but the top money what you would have used with your time, if you didn't choose to go to Queensland. So there are a range of different things that come with opportunity costs. So, for example, what's the opportunity cost of leaving school at 16? That's all the benefits from the next best alternative. So, assuming the next best alternative is staying at school, that's the benefits of being able to get potentially a tertiary education in the future. The long holidays whilst you're at school, so you get quite a few weeks off. You might, get a job where you only get 3 or 4 weeks a year off. The larger future income would be the part of the opportunity cost. The higher status in society from getting a higher education and a good job. So all that would come into the opportunity cost or the next best alternative from leaving school at 16. So other examples of opportunity costs are the government when they're determining where to allocate their scarce resources. So, for example, if they have money and they're weighing up whether to put it for education or infrastructure or welfare, if they choose to put it towards education and they feel that infrastructure is the next best alternative, that's the opportunity cost. The next best alternative option is your opportunity cost, which in this case is infrastructure. The next best alternative is the opportunity cost. In terms of an individual, spend $5 on a soft drink, the opportunity cost would be all the benefits from that buying a healthy drink. Um, if you choose to leave school early, if choosing whether to get up in the morning and go for a run, your opportunity cost would be the next best alternative. Businesses face opportunity costs when they're making choices, where they allocate their resources. So if they spend money, so if they allocate their resources to making a certain product, it might be they have to give up making another product. If they choose to spend millions of dollars on an infrastructure project, they may have to give up money for spending elsewhere. Hiring workers is another good example. If you hire one worker, whatever your next best alternative would probably be, the next best alternative would be the next best worker you could have hired if you didn't hire that person. That would be their opportunity cost and all the benefits you would have got from hiring that person. So all countries face relative scarcity. We have unlimited wants and needs, but limited resources. Therefore, we need to make choices. Every choice requires trade-offs, so we have to give up quite a lot of things. The next best alternative that we give up is the opportunity cost. Okay. Next thing, material and non-material living standards. We'll talk about this a little bit more in other videos, but basically the aim of society is to maximize both our material and non-material living standards. Materials measured by GDP per capita or income per person, where non-material living standards are other quality of life factors. So, for example, material would be like GDP per capita. It rises when the economy gets bigger. The economy grows faster, our production grows faster than our population, then we'll have more income per person. So another thing, it also depends on how evenly we distribute that income. So the more evenly it's distributed, often more people's material living standards will increase. Also impacted by inflation. So when prices rise, we need to make sure that our purchasing power or wages grow faster than inflation, or people have less money to spend. Non-material living standards, other quality of life factors. So things like personal happiness, the level of pollution, leisure time, job satisfaction, crime levels, congestion, all these other factors that impact our quality of life. So if we feel safe at night, access to clean air, access to clean water, our life expectancies, level of gender equality. So are there the same access or same rights for men and women? all these things come into play when we're looking at non-material living standards. So material living standards, income per person, and we'll talk about GDP more in a later video. Non-material living standards, other quality of life factors. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this video is what we call the three key economic questions. So all countries or all economies have to face three key economic questions. Okay, and those three economic questions are what and how much to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Okay, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. What to produce basically means what goods and services we're going to produce. How to produce is how we're going to make them. And for whom to produce is who's going to get access to those goods and services. That's basically what it means. What are we going to make, how are we going to make it, and who's going to get access to those products? They're the three key economic questions that any economy must answer. So what and how much to produce is the first one. And basically it determines how we're going to allocate our scarce resources. So what products are we going to make? How are we going to allocate our capital and our labour and land to determine what products we're going to use? Because resources are limited, we can't satisfy all our wants and needs, so we have to make choices. So in Australia, and this is an important concept and a new concept, is that in a free market, it's essentially consumer sovereignty that determines what is produced. And what we mean by that is producers will essentially produce what consumers want. Okay, self-interested producers will allocate their resources, their land, their labour, and their capital to produce what consumers want because that's how they're going to make a profit. Okay, there's no point in making stuff that people don't want because you won't make any profit. So in a free market economy with no government intervention, consumer sovereignty dictates what is produced, which basically means consumers decide what is produced. So in Australia, we don't have a purely what we call capitalist economy. We have a mix of both private and government ownership. So most things in Australia are privately owned, like all these companies, but the government steps in to provide healthcare, to provide schools, and provide a range of other services as well. So Australia has a mixed market economy, which means around 80% of resources are privately owned, which means that basically demand and supply determine what is produced. So when there's more demand, businesses will shift their resources into making those products. And that's saying that consumer sovereignty dictates what's produced. And what consumers want determines what is produced. And that's because producers are self-interested and they're going to produce where they're going to generate the highest profits. Okay, but then the government intervenes in the economy. There's a thing called market failures, which we'll talk about in another video. But the government intervenes because some things are underproduced, things like public housing, prisons, schools, hospitals, and some things are overproduced that are bad for our living standards, like illicit drugs and weapons and alcohol. The government steps in to ensure there's a more efficient allocation of resources. The next question, so essentially what to produce, mainly through consumer sovereignty and demand and supply. So things that are in higher demand will be produced more because they're more profitable. But then the government steps in and makes sure that certain things aren't overproduced and some things aren't underproduced. So they will tax certain products to make sure they're not overproduced and subsidize or give money to people to provide other products so they're not underproduced. How to produce basically means what combination of labour and capital are we going to use? Are we going to use mainly labour in the production process, or are we going to use mainly capital in the production process? And essentially, businesses make that decision by whatever is most cost effective and essentially whatever is cheaper out of the two of them. So essentially, if it's cheaper to use more labour, so let's say it's a country with a low minimum wage, they'll use more labour in the production process. Where if it's cheaper to use more capital, like for example, a Safeway is using more self-service checkouts, they'll use more capital in the production. And your last question is for who to produce. And what that means is who's going to get access to the scarce resources that are, to the products that are produced in the economy. So who's going to get access to the things that are produced? In a country like Australia and most countries, basically those who have higher incomes can afford to buy more goods and services. And generally in a market economy, it's those that have skills that are in demand. So the talents or skills that are in demand generally get paid more and then they get access to more goods and services. So for whom to produce is basically based on people's incomes, which is based on people's talents and what they can contribute to the production process. Those who can contribute more get access to more goods and services. Those who contribute less get access to less goods. The government also steps in, though, in a country like Australia, so we don't have a purely market economy. So they'll step in to try and ensure that everyone gets access to some goods and services, not just those with skills or skills that are in demand. So, for example, we have a progressive tax system, which means the rich pay a higher percentage of their income in tax, and the poor, lower income earners pay a smaller percentage. They also give welfare benefits to people that are unemployed, that are sick, um, people on the pension. There's public services like healthcare and housing. And we also have a minimum wage, which is now actually over $19 per hour, to mean that low skilled workers get paid an amount that allows them to live off. So there's some ways the government intervene to make sure that the for whom to produce question isn't too uneven, that there's a more even distribution of income. And that's all.